get the garment for X from China and it costs 5X from New Zealand. But hang on, if the supply chain breaks down, it's kind of irrelevant how much it would have cost. People want to know the people behind brands. If you look at one of our packs, tend to be a lot simpler than other companies' packs. I would say less stuff that can go wrong.
Welcome to a Kiwi Original. You're listening to episode 9 of the series so far. And today on the show with me, I have Ben Kepes from, I think you're based in Christchurch. Is that right at the moment, Ben?
I actually live in North Canterbury, so I'm about an hour north of Christchurch. So I'm looking out my window. It's actually pouring with rain, which is great. But yeah, surrounded by vineyards and all very picturesque.
Nice spot to be. So we're going to be talking about a number of different areas with Ben because of his not only passion, but his commitment to New Zealand manufacturing, and maybe touch on some other areas because Ben, for those of you who don't know, is a very broad, skilled and expertised individual, is a tech commentator, investor, and board member on a number of non-profits, as well as some interesting things in the software area. So we may get onto that, we may not. But I guess first question for you, Ben, is what do you see the kind of state of play of New Zealand manufacturing that brought about the acquisition of Albion, a brand that had been around in New Zealand since 1967. Cactus Outdoor, been around for 25, almost 30 years. What brought you and your other shareholders to decide this was a good time to acquire and grow a little bit bigger?
Yeah, so I guess two things in particular. The first is from our business perspective, we have to ensure survival. We have to own our own destiny. We have to have our own supply chain. And so we always had a little factory making backpacks, but all of our clothing was made in other factories. One of which was Albion Clothing, and the guy that started Albion Clothing passed away a few years ago, and we had the opportunity about 6 months ago to acquire it. So that's the first thing, our own kind of business survival. But also, I've been on my soapbox now for decades around local manufacturing. When Cactus first started, or when Cactus first moved to Christchurch back in the mid-90s, Christchurch was an absolute humming hub of apparel manufacturing. You had Lane Walker Rudkin, you had Ferrydown, Macpac was still here. Kathmandu started here and started manufacturing here, and it was all happening here. And what we've seen over 25 years since then is it's really sad. We've seen the industry decimated, and I think that our perspective was that either we bought Albion now and invested in manufacturing and invested in the sort of broader apparel manufacturing ecosystem, or in 5 years' time it would be gone. So this was kind of us putting the industry on life support, I guess.
So there's a consolidation part there because you saw potentially a risk of that going as well. What does having Albion Clothing as part of Cactus, that partnership, what does it do when you've got now an additional, I think it was 90 or 100 staff? Like what does that scale of just humans being able to make stuff, what does that do for the business?
Yeah, I mean, so it's really surreal. Like, Cactus has been sort of 20 people or less forever. And all of a sudden in one day we became 100 plus. And that's scary because, I'm not that guy. And so that was hard to deal with kind of on a sort of a personal level. But in terms of scale, so Albion makes, a bunch of commercial contracts. So it makes uniforms for police, fire and emergency New Zealand, Department of Corrections, Defence, Navy. And so, you've just got that much more that you can do. All of a sudden you can have conversations with some really, really big players. And so last year, Kathmandu wanted to do a range of New Zealand made, because, their stuff is all made offshore. They wanted to do a range of New Zealand made merino, where the wool was grown here, it was spun in Australia and made into garments here. And so we were able to do that for them. Whereas in the past, we just didn't have the scale to do that. So it opens up a bunch of opportunities. And I think the other thing that we're seeing, I mean, it's great to do the government agency work. It's really good work to have. But there's a lot of New Zealand fashion brands who are thinking about their supply chain and the fragility of that supply chain, and are saying, well, you know, we can get the garment for X from China and it costs 5X from New Zealand. That's a lot of money. But hang on, if the supply chain breaks down and we can't get the garment from China, it's kind of irrelevant how much it would have cost. So we're having lots of those conversations at the moment. And part of that is this whole coronavirus thing. But part of it is just a general realization that cheap, and I say cheap in inverted commas, isn't the right lens to look through, because, China isn't as cheap as it used to be because they've got a growing middle class and prices are going up. But B, you know, any organisation that truly wants to be ethical rather than just saying it's ethical is going to think about the social and environmental costs of its manufacturing. And the reason that stuff is cheap in China is because they don't have good labour standards. They certainly don't have good environmental standards. Your garments have to be shipped halfway across the world. All of that stuff there's a growing awareness of. And so I think that now is the time, now is the opportunity to kind of change the conversation around where our stuff is made. And we're seeing it, you know, I mean, lots and lots of people, admittedly those who have the luxury to be able to afford it, but lots of people, you know, go and do their shopping on a weekend at the farmer's market because they like to know who's grown their fruit, who's made their cheese, who's you know, butchered their meat or whatever. And I think it's the same thing. People want to know the people behind brands. And so if you look at Cactus, there's three of us that have been there since the early 90s. You know, those three are still there, you know, one way or another. It's the same people doing the same stuff. And so, yes, we're bigger and we've got more employees and whatever, but we're still the same thing. With those other big brands, you really can't say that because they're just brands. We're people, I guess.
And I think you're right. Like particularly over the last decade, since social media has opened up some of the people behind the brands. If there are no people behind the brands because it's mass, it's global, it's multinational, it's much more difficult to then build that relationship because mass media isn't cutting it anymore. People do want that narrative that makes them, when they're buying that product or service, to feel like I'm buying this because this brand is an extension of the values that are important to me as an individual. And so for some of the bigger brands that maybe aren't values driven, that creates a vulnerability. So I think some of those are kind of either acquiring businesses to get those values and those customers, or are shifting to at least get access to that type of individual that is more values driven when they shop. So a question for you is, when you bring back that manufacturing, if there are New Zealand manufacturers, and I've seen this on the automation side, they're picking up equipment that enables them to do more with less number of hours of labor put into a product in non-apparel. When you're considering that versus, you know, what you'd seen in the 90s in Christchurch of how garments was made, what do you see as where Albion will go that can take advantage of technology that wasn't around in the 90s?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And so we have, for example, we have a robotic cutting machine. So in the old days, and still at most factories sort of smaller than ours, when people are cutting fabric, they sort of lay it up in 15 or 20, 30 layers, and then they use this horrible, scary 8-inch power knife to cut out the piece of fabric, which is really, really dangerous, but also takes a long time. We've got this robot, which is really cool, this sort of CNC robot that cuts the fabric. And there's lots of things you can do in terms of both the way the garments are constructed, i.e., you can weld seams as opposed to sewing them, but also sewing with automated machines. I think, though, that I would be really sad if in 10 years' time we walked into the Albion factory and there wasn't a single person. It was just spotlessly clean and there were just robots, because I think that, I walk around the factory. I always tell the story. So my my brother, when we first bought Albion, he was visiting and got one of the supervisors to take him for a tour around the factory. And he's a master builder. He builds these incredible houses for very, very rich expats who come down and spend a few weeks in New Zealand every year, kind of thing. And so he's a craftsman. He comes home at the end of the day and he's crafted this thing of beauty. And he said to me after he had a look around, he said, I never realised what was involved in apparel. So he was looking at someone who was making a formal blazer that the fire service personnel wear for their formal events and occasions, and kind of grew a realisation that actually that is craftsmanship as much as what he builds is. And I would hate us to lose that, for us to just become machines and processes. So I think balancing automation with the human touch is really important.
I think, reminded me of when I visited Cactus. I think it was Rob down there who took me through the various super trousers, different styles, and all the R&D that had gone into designing them a certain way. And then we went on to this backpack, and he said, how many pieces of fabric do you think it takes to create this backpack? And I can't recall the exact number, but it was over 100 different pieces that went into this backpack. And it wasn't just the number of pieces, it was the design and iterative thought that had gone into what's going to be the best outdoor experience when you're out in the wilderness and you want to stay there and you want to be comfortable getting from A to B to C to D. That was all in these individual pieces of fabric that then the machinists were sewing and putting together and putting the Cactus Outdoor label on. I agree it would be sad, but at the same time, you've got to create a cost competitive product. So I guess it's getting that balance right to put humans where doing jobs that machines can't do, or on scale of products runs that machines can't do, and put machines in for the things that humans aren't designed for, which is repetitive, menial work.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's also another angle, which is purposeful design. And so what you're seeing out of China at the moment is because labour there is so cheap, what they're doing is they're increasing the complexity of the products hugely because labour's cheap. What our angle is that we will design a product purposefully. So we won't put in extraneous stuff that isn't needed. So you can design, I guess you can call it minimalism, or you can call it a return to mid-century design or whatever. But when we're creating a product, because we have these constraints around high labour costs, we have to think around the most sort of elegant and simple and refined solution to a problem, which I think brings in quite a lot of discipline to your process, as opposed to we can do anything, we'll just throw some more seams or some more people or some hours at it, which isn't the right way to go around solve a problem, I don't think.
I think this has happened before. Like, I know this has happened within technology, was the TVs and VHS players and remote controls had more and more features added on, particularly on amplifiers. You'd have the bass boost button, then you'd have 5 equalizers or 10. And then Apple came along and said, you don't need any of that. You just need 1,000 songs in your pocket. And we're not going to give you any of those controls because they're unnecessary if you design it with the user in mind. So what would that mean then for outdoor equipment when you're designing for the minimum of what's required rather than bells and whistles for anything that might potentially happen?
Yeah, so if you look at, one of our packs, for example, notwithstanding the 100 pieces of fabric or whatever, if you look at one of our packs, they tend to be a lot simpler than other companies' packs, with less seams, less pockets, less zips. I would say less stuff that can go wrong, less potential leakage points, less things that can break. So there's a definite engineering for simplicity. And again, I think I'm not a designer, and I wouldn't ever suggest that I am. But I make furniture for a hobby, and I really love that Danish design, where very, very simple but incredibly elegant and masterfully fit for purpose. If we could be the Danish design of packs and outdoor clothing, I'd be stoked.
Sorry to interrupt. This won't take long. Subscribe to the show and you'll never miss another one of these amazing episodes. Right, back to the show. I think that's the challenge for any manufacturer in New Zealand, is to look at where can we deliver value through smart thinking and application of technology and human skills, because we can't deliver en masse. We've only got 5 million people here, so we need to be smarter rather than try and produce more goods. Kind of moving to another area, the other part of your business, or an area that you're focused in, is the technology side. The company called Raygun, which does the software for error tracking. What's it like when you shift from one mode when you're thinking about backpacks and trousers and clothing into something which is, there's no tangible outcome. In fact, your product never gets seen by any consumer. It's a software dev program to test developers' code. Like, how do you shift your mental model between, those two companies and others that you mentor?
Yeah, so I, about 15 years ago, I started doing a bunch of sort of technology analysis stuff overseas, and then started doing advisory work and investing and stuff in technology companies. And so now, while Cactus is my kind of biggest thing, or it takes a lot of my time, and the majority of my time, I spend a heap of time as a professional board member. And yeah, you're right. I mean, it seems a bit bizarre to, on one hand, be a director of a manufacturing company making clothes, and the other, a director of a technology company. But actually, to be honest, not so much. It's actually kind of easy. This is the big kind of fraud of governance, and that is that the more of it you do, the better you become at doing it, because it's just about pattern matching. Fundamentally, governance is about people. Every organisation, the issues they face come back to people at some point. The root cause is people, or the root opportunity to take advantage of is people. And so I don't see any incongruence around the different things I do, because in all of them, they're kind of around dealing with people, getting the best out of people. And fundamentally, I'm not good at much, and so I get to be involved with lots and lots of different businesses, all of whom have lots of people who are way better at most things than I am, and I get to kind of bask in the glory of the awesome work they do. So, I consider myself really fortunate to do what I do, whether it's Cactus or any of the other organisations I'm involved with.
What are some of the governance issues that you're having to deal with or expecting to deal with now versus the 2020 we all thought we were going to be living a couple of months ago?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, when we're recording this, it's the middle of, well, we don't know if it's the middle, but we're sort of 1 week into the lockdown, so who knows what the future will bring. And so it's really interesting because, I'm a chartered member of the Institute of Directors, and when you go on your Institute of Directors course, they very rightly tell you that governance isn't about management. There's a divide. Governors shouldn't be involved in day-to-day. You need to steer clear of that, all of that stuff. And that's true. Except right now we've got lots and lots and lots of organisations in New Zealand are facing an existential threat. And, I would contend that every director needs to be standing up and getting actually quite involved. And so, I'm on probably a dozen different boards, and at the moment, pretty much all of those boards are meeting at least weekly and some daily, because that's what you need to do. And so, 3 months ago, if you said what are the issues that as a director you need to think about, I would have sort of waxed poetic about disruption, Uber and Airbnb, and every organisation is, software is going to disrupt them and all of that stuff, which I still believe. But when your economy falls off a cliff and your entire market is staying at home, you've got some, real and present danger today, rather than some kind of conceptual stuff coming down the future. So I find it really interesting. I'm I've done a bunch of stuff in the emergency services in the past and still do. And I was at a board meeting the other day, and I was talking to someone saying, it's terrible that people are getting sick and dying. It's awful. But in terms of reacting to what businesses need to do around COVID-19, I'm loving it, because as a firefighter, you go and deal with one burning building and you get to be the hero and you get to save that building and then you go home. Right now, the whole world is on fire. And so every organisation that I'm involved with is essentially a burning building, and it's awesome. It's probably quite unhealthy because the adrenaline levels are seriously high, and that can only happen so long. But it's a really interesting time to be a director.
It certainly is. I've found those adrenaline shots have been peaking a number of times over the last couple of weeks, and through the last weekends, just making sure I'm getting out and going for a walk or going for a gentle run or something just to balance things up. And going through that phase, it just reminded me, you're quite fortuitous with what Cactus was working on prior to this actually happening with the face mask side of it. And I remember getting an email from you in my Buy NZ Made inbox. I think it was the 24th or 25th of Feb, saying that you were doing these masks. And at that time, I actually bought a couple of masks for my family and got them rerouted and sent to the right places. And they all kind of laughed at me at the time. But it's been really useful just to, whether or not, there is official advice on wearing them, I just feel better being around others wearing one of those masks. What's the strategy there with, Cactus face masks? Because that was quite early on, and I think you've done another pre-order last week. Where does this sit with the general public?
Yeah, sure. So the genesis of that product had nothing to do with coronavirus, because coronavirus didn't exist when we first started working on it about 6 months or more ago. We make a lot of work where we have a lot of builders and landscapers and gardens and stuff who are customers, and all of those trades, occupations or pastimes create dust or sawdust or fumes or whatever, and so all of those people have to wear face masks. And I know, in my woodworking workshop, I've got had a bunch of those, crappy old masks that fall off your face and don't do anything. And so from that was born the idea, hey, Cactus could do face masks for builders to wear on the building site that would last a really long time, like all Cactus stuff does. And so we started developing that, and then kind of February along came coronavirus, and the filter medium that we use is tested beyond N95, so it's not certified, and we don't suggest that it is certified, but it does block all that stuff. And so serendipitously, we had a product that was really applicable to people, and so we've ramped up production. We're pumping out, as we speak. We've got 3 factories stood up making these masks. Huge demand from individuals, but also, again, we're recording this early in the coronavirus thing, and so we don't know where that will go. But we've had anecdotal conversations with a bunch of emergency services, health sector people, other related people saying that they can't get their hands on PPE and wanting to know about what we're doing. So, it's just bizarre, and lucky is the wrong word because it's very unlucky, but it's just bizarre timing.
I think whatever happens going forward, having access from different sources can't be a bad thing, and being able to get it to people, whether it's the general public or those who are in the front line, we should do everything we possibly can to protect those that are going out and literally risking their lives. I mean, it's not like we can see this tiny microscopic enemy, but it is out there like it is in every other country. From your background of being a paramedic and a firefighter, how do you process the health side of this versus someone like myself that really, I've got no idea of what this looks like from a health perspective?
Yeah, so I was a paramedic in Christchurch for a while, not anymore, but I am still a firefighter. I've been a firefighter for 22 or 23 years, and it's bizarre. So we have stopped training. We're doing 96-hour rotating shifts, so everyone's on duty 4 days on, 4 days off. Crazy things like, it used to be that you'd come back from a fire call and you'd go into the social room and you'd have a drink and have a yarn and go home. Now it's, when the siren goes up, you turn up to the station, but you don't go inside because you wait, you want the minimum number of people inside, the 4 go on the truck and only 4, and then you come back and spend an hour disinfecting and cleaning the truck. It's bizarre. I mean, from one perspective, it's what we do, right? We're here to help people, help our communities. It's a privilege to be able to serve. Anyone that signs up to be, a firefighter or paramedic, especially as a volunteer, is driven by that stuff. But on the other hand, it's also a little bit scary because, as you said, you can't see this thing. And I don't particularly want to go out and catch something nasty because I'm helping people out. We're issued with PPE and we're protected and all that sort of stuff. But it is kind of surreal because normally, as a firefighter for 20-something years, I've known that when I was going to an incident, whether it was a car crash or a fire or whatever, I know exactly what the issue is. That house is on fire. I need to watch out because fire's hot, and in a fire, things fall down. Okay, I can see all of those issues pretty much, or I can feel them. I can't with this one, so that is a little bit weird, but we just do what we do. And there's, our risk is minimal. The real heroes are the people in hospitals. I was reading an article the other day that said that the statistics around health workers getting coronavirus, and it's horrendous because obviously they're exposed to it the whole time, and so those people are real heroes.
Outside of the work that you do and the volunteering that you do for the fire service and so on, I know you're a super keen runner, and doing my research, you said that the Old Ghost Road is the one of the top 10, if not in the top 3, to go and do, and you've done it a few years in a row. For people listening, this is a race that's 85 kilometers long, so we're in ultra marathon territory. It's 3,000 meters of altitude ups and downs. And Ben, who probably too humble to say, came 13th out of 275 one year and did it in just a few hours, just 8 hours. How do you get through something like that? Like, I've done a marathon, fine, but how do you do double that? Like, what's going on in the mind that gets you through that?
Well, so the big secret of ultra marathons is that they have really good aid stations. So you get to eat whatever you want, which is really cool. In fact, one year, the first year I did the Old Ghost, at the 55k mark, they had whitebait patties. That was motivation in itself. But, I'm lucky. I've got 2 sons. The eldest son is also a runner. And so, we did the Old Ghost Road about a month ago, the race, and we did it together. So for 8.5 hours, every step we took together. So, it's hard not to be motivated when you've got something like that happening.
So the family element gets it through. And was that Yanni's your son? Was that his first run?
No, he's the youngest ever Australasian to do a 100-mile race. He's done the Old Ghost. He did it when he was 16. He did his first marathon when he was 13. So he's a bit of a superstar runner. Leaves me for dead. Actually, he doesn't. We're pretty even right now. But in terms of he's only just turned 20. So he's flying. He's going uphill and doing well. And my career is coming to a sad end, but that's fine.
Well, at that age, you've got the heart rate, you've got the stamina, you've got times on your side. But when you get to our age, when you're in your 40s, you're battling just the physical wall of age. You just can't get through it.
And the thing that really sucks is that it's a one-way street, because I'm only going to get slower. He's only going to get faster. I mean, eventually he'll hit the 40s and come down as well. But it's kind of depressing to know that each time I do a race, it's like I might not do that particular race faster ever again. So, it's something I'm going to have to get myself reconciled to.
It's that whole use it while you got it, isn't it? So you've got no regrets when you get to the other end of things. Ben, is there anything else I haven't asked you that you would like to discuss as we kind of finish off and round out this chat?
I mean, I think, obviously, as we've said before, this is the middle, or this is some part of the coronavirus story and journey. And I think the interesting thing you've been talking about it for the longest time, and I have as well, is what will the economy look like? What will New Zealand look like at the other end of this? And so I guess, I've been talking to a bunch of people around it. The win from this horrible thing we're going through could be that in a year and 2 years and 3 years' time, when you look at New Zealand, we say, wow, our economy is more resilient. It's doing more that's important. It can support itself. It's more equitable. It's delivering outcomes both, that are financial, but are also social and environmental in a better way than it was before coronavirus. If we could have achieved all of that, I think all of this heartache will be worth it. That's my hope. We're all at the moment, sitting locked at home for 4 weeks, which kind of sucks. But if our world can be better at the end of it, then maybe it will be worth it.
I think that's very insightful, and I think there will be business owners out there, I hope, using the next 4 weeks to work on their business and think about it from their perspective. And certainly at a national level, there is an opportunity for government or some of the large influencers in the private sector to think, well, if we were to restart this economy from scratch, what should or could it look like? I was listening to the Chief Executive of Tourism Holdings Limited, and they're certainly looking at, well, how do they redefine the tourist experience and who might come to New Zealand? What might they do? What operators might still be around? So I think there are opportunities out there, and the next 4 weeks for business is to use that time to work on the business and think about that, not just the recovery phase, but what's the change you seek to make as a business? And given these macro events that have changed and shifted things, how can you use this challenge as an opportunity to actually grow back stronger?
Absolutely, I think 100%. I think the other aspect is that as consumers, we're not absolved from the responsibility of thinking about it from our perspective as well. And so, yes, all of those organisations, governments, and big business need to think about their stuff, but we vote with our wallets, and so we all like shiny new things and the latest cell phone and big screen TVs and late model vehicles or whatever. But we need to think about our consumption, because at the end of the day, if we change what we do, then businesses will supply what we want. So it's a two-way street. I think we need to be mindful of that.
And I think that's a great note to end it on, Ben. So thank you very much for your time today and for contributing to the Kiwi original series, where we uncover uniquely Kiwi stories that are contributing to New Zealand's future. And certainly what you're doing with Cactus is part of that broader trend, bringing more manufacturing back to New Zealand. And I wish you all the success through this year, through current events, as well as what you're planning to grow Albion, and certainly growing those factories to be able to help more people get jobs within New Zealand.
Awesome, and thanks to you, and thanks for all that you do, because you're another lone warrior, and it's appreciated.
I am just trying to connect good people up with good stories so that we can share what we're doing with New Zealand manufacturing a little bit wider. So again, I'll throw that thanks back to you. But appreciated the comment, Ben. Thank you. This has been a Kiwi original brought to you by the New Zealand Made team. Thanks for watching. The New Zealand Made trademark is used by over 1,200 businesses in New Zealand. The New Zealand Made team licenses that trademark. Check if you're eligible at bynz.org.nz. If you feel that someone should see this, share it with them now. Otherwise, subscribe to youtube.com/bynzmade, and we'll see you on the next episode.